But Anya, I wanted to ask you to, keep putting this kind of in a wider perspective for us. Since the Iran deal, Iran has sort of been moving away from negotiations with the U.S., especially after the killing of Soleimani. I don't think the Iran considers the U.S. a honest broker, even if it can cut a deal with one administration, another one will come in and break the deal. It's joined BRICS. It's joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So, put this response in the context of sort of a shifting geopolitical reality.
Well, people should recall that the Iran deal was controversial in Iran itself because there are elements within the Iranian government and Iranian society that saw it as a way for the West to actually weaken Iran and weaken Iran's position within this global chessboard that we now are seeing play out around Israel, that Iran has known was always the war that they were preparing for decades. Because and this is what's so odd about the commentary that I've seen on US media throughout the last 2 days. Also, I even saw it on Al Jazeera, the Qatari state media, trying to spin Iran's attack. Many of their commentators and anchors were trying to suggest that this was actually beneficial to Netanyahu because it took eyes away from the war in Gaza and made Israel look like a victim. Well, that is, to me, just an asinine way of viewing this conflict, because you can't separate what is happening from in Iran and in Syria from what is happening in Gaza. This is all one war. So to look at Gaza as a vacuum is really to live in a fantasy land. This war is part of a war that Israel has been fighting since its founding to establish what it views as greater Israel in the region. The war in Syria was absolutely part of that, as Aaron mentioned, securing the Golan Heights. They didn't get regime change in Syria, but securing Golan Heights for Israel was an important consolidation in that overall plan that Israel has. And they've, the Yom Kippur War, all of these wars were all about gaining the territory that Israel has mapped out as its rightful land. And so the strike that occurred in Damascus when Israel hit this Iranian consulate was a strike in this war because they were targeting the commanding general of the Al-Quds force, the Iranian, element within the Iranian military that actually strategizes with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. All of what we always constantly hear are the Iranian proxies in the area, in the region, that are attacking Israel right now, the only ones willing to deliver Israel a bloody nose as it carries out this genocide in Gaza. And so that was a direct strike, a way to lure Iran into direct confrontation with Israel, but also take out not only this commanding general, but his advisors and other prominent figures that are coordinating this war and fighting Israel on a daily basis in a way that people, I think, in the West cannot really comprehend. And so we cannot separate what Iran did in Israel from the war in Gaza. Of course, like Aaron said, that's just where Netanyahu can turn up the heat in order to prove his bloodlust and his toughness, because now Iran really has demonstrated that and just like on October 7th, when we saw the paper tiger of the Israeli National Security State is weak or perhaps devious, I don't know. Hopefully we'll get answers onto what actually happened around the intelligence failures there years from now. But we also now have seen the paper tiger of the Iron Dome system. The Iron Dome, there's that video of Trump talking about how it goes like pew, 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 and you have 17 seconds to hit anything that comes into Israel's airspace. It's supposed to be this amazing piece of technology, but it's only an amazing piece of technology because of all of the U.S. taxpayer money that we pump into it. Now it's possibly depleted. And so we're going to have to vote and push more money, billions of dollars, into Israel's little system again. But the reality is the Iranians can keep depleting it if they would like to. And if Israel would like to keep this war, escalating this war. And the reality is so many Israelis have already left Israel, even before this Iranian strike, because of the attacks from Hezbollah and Hamas, and they don't ever plan on going back. Israel's economy is already suffering to a degree that I think a few years from now, we will see this war had already defeated Israel, perhaps even before the Iranians retaliated. Israel is weaker than ever.
I just want to say one thing about Syria. It's nothing new to anybody who watches the Grayzone, but it's still not, I think, understood in like the left media that we're a part of. That I just hope people can see now with Iran firing back at Israel, Hezbollah also doing damage to Israel, and Hezbollah actually holding back, not doing as much damage as it could, because Israel's been actually avoiding trying to fight Hezbollah directly because Hezbollah can fight back. The people can see why the Syria dirty war happened. It's so obvious. They wanted to actually draw in Iran and Hezbollah to bleed them there because they didn't want to fight them directly, and they wanted to use the CIA proxies and the insurgents to do it for them. And it's still not understood, but it's so obvious why. And the importance of these countries in being able to resist and deter Israeli U.S. hegemony, it's underscored right now because they're the only ones who are fighting back. So no wonder the U.S. and Israel and their allies invested so much money in a proxy war in Syria trying to bleed them.
Yeah, and to destroy the Palestine solidarity movement in the United States and splinter it along these lines. You either had people that supported the war on Syria and were completely disconnected from the bigger picture and the centrality of the Syrian state to Palestinian resistance, and just completely actually throwing Palestinians under the bus at that point. Or you had people who were too afraid to discuss Syria and take it on because they thought that it would spoil Palestine. But I mean, how ridiculous is that? Now, looking at this world that we're living in, it's clear you cannot, again, remove Palestine from everyone else in the region. And it's very telling because all of the Turkish government, the Qatari government, the Saudi government, all of the Muslim states in the region that were pummeling Syria and doing everything they could to destroy it have not really been there for the Palestinians throughout these last several months. And in fact, the Turks are supplying Israel's fuel and selling Israel weapons. That's Erdogan, the great wannabe leader of the new Turkish empire and like revamped Muslim Brotherhood. So what does that really say about those groups and those organizations if when it push comes to shove, when this genocide and destruction of Palestine is happening before our eyes, that's where the Muslim leaders all end up?
Yeah, well, you see, go ahead.
Well, just quickly, Jordan, right? Like Jordan goes from hosting the CIA base that was used to coordinate the Syrian insurgency's operations, including its takeover of the province of Idlib, the last so-called rebel-controlled province of Syria. So Jordan hosts that. It also hosts some U.S. military base. That's where those 3 American soldiers were killed recently in that drone attack. And now what happened just this past weekend? Jordan is helping Israel shoot down Iranian drones and missiles.
Yeah.
In a country where, is it the majority of the population are Palestinian refugees, or at least a huge amount of people are Palestinian refugees, but their leadership is a straight up collaborator with Israel and the US and assisting Israel in deterring the one country that's resisting Israel.
The dirty little secret about Jordan is that for all of their talk of being an ancient Hashemite empire, like with bloodlines ties to this ancient kingdom, the king of Jordan is half British. And if that were the case, if they were really this ancient royal family, you wouldn't have a blue-eyed British man running the kingdom of Jordan. You would have someone who looked more like this other tribal leader in the picture. And it's important that the like cherry on top of that dirty secret is that Jordan is an invented kingdom. It's Palestine. Okay. Like it should be from the river to past the river, all the way to all of Jordan to the sea is Palestine. The British are the ones that just drew these little maps and said, okay, we're going to put a little invented kingdom here to act as a buffer zone between our little state where we're going to export a bunch of European refugees and make Israel. Then they put this little kingdom on the side to kind of act as a buffer between the rest of the region. And now we see ultimately the king of Jordan simply exists to protect Israel. That's it. And it's because he answers to NATO and the British and his masters. He doesn't answer to some proud Jordanian people.
Yeah, the Hashemite monarchy, as you said, it's installed by the British after the Hashemites were kicked out of Iraq. Sykes-Picot in the Great Game divided up the Middle East, invented this little country, Transjordan, and during the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, which is referred to in Israel as the War of Independence, King Abdullah I was hosting a female emissary from the Zionist movement who was working directly under David Ben-Gurion, who was to be the first prime minister of Israel, and her name was Golda Meir, Golda Meirson from Milwaukee, who was sent in Arab garb undercover to conduct these secret negotiations with King Abdullah, where they would divide up and annex Palestine after conducting a phony war in which the Royal Jordanian Army, which had been trained by Pasha Glub by the British, would fight all the way up to the Latrun Gap, but stop there so as not to destroy the Zionist army, the Haganah, and they would grant Israel the rest of Palestine. The rest of what took place within there wasn't really all these Arab armies teaming up on this puny little David foe. It was the Arab Liberation Armies armed with old M1 carbines that barely worked. Those were the Palestinian Indigenous Resistance Forces, some Muslim Brotherhood volunteers from Egypt, and pretty much nothing else. The Matzpen movement in Israel, the first anti-Zionist group of Jewish Israelis, exposed all of this, and then Avi Shleim took it to the next level and wrote a book about it for those who are interested. But basically, the Jordanian monarchy sold out the Palestinians in such a catastrophic way that in 1951, a Palestinian actually assassinated Abdullah I. Then you have the next monarch, King Hussein, sells out again, normalizes with Israel under the watch of President Bill Clinton, and gains nothing. And now we have his son, or we have Abdullah II. Sorry. Yeah.
And on that point, like Netanyahu and Bashar al-Assad, perhaps you could say, what am I mistaken that there was another son that not born from the British wife that was meant to inherit the crown from King Abdullah's father? Or am I making that up?
I believe that I believe that's the case. But it was I'm gonna get hazy
that, but I'm pretty sure
on the situation
that
there.
it's one of those common storylines where there was another son, another brother who was meant to inherit the throne, but
well, I mean, you go to Jordan now, you're good. I mean, you're going to see pictures of this teenager. I guess maybe he's in his 20s now. The last time I was there as a teenager, they're just pictures of an adolescent boy everywhere. It's like a lost boy on a milk carton, except he's wearing a military uniform. That is Abdullah's son, who they're preparing to take over again. And he's basically being prepared in all the academies in England for this role. So that's what you have there, is basically a human warehouse for Palestinian refugees.